Good morning. It's the day before the election. The big day's here, and it's November 2nd. Dan Murphy here, Seth on the other side of the plexiglass, and we're going to kind of guide you through our third part of our three-part series, touch on the election, the economy, and kind of what to expect, this week, and obviously, weeks perhaps going forward. So we'll see about that, but let's bring you right into some of the most crucial elements when we kind of look at, our final video. We've had a tremendous amount of people that have watched those first two parts, and we think that everybody will continue on with this one too as well. Obviously, tomorrow's election, polls open at least in New York at 6 a.m. A large turnout's expected. I guess, we both have comments about this, but we've seen some of the numbers come in from, let's say, just New York, and New York probably had about 250 to 300,000 people each day through New York or throughout New York poll sites, with people showing up to vote in person over that time period. That does not account the absentee ballots. Obviously, New Yorkers were not mailed ballots across the board unless they were asked for, which would be absentee balloting. With that said, I would say personally that I think the voting sites are still gonna be very busy tomorrow.
Absolutely.
In spite of that, you've got some other states where they've got a tremendous amount, like in Florida, for example. I know that they've had a tremendous amount of people that have showed up already for in-person ballot, in-person voting. And so you might have some states out there that do have very light exposure tomorrow, from 6 a.m. till the polls close at 9. But I don't, based on the numbers that I've seen that New York State has actually put out there, I don't see that it's going to diminish a tremendous amount of people going out tomorrow and voting. So I would say, you really want to give yourself plenty of time, not wait till the last minute. Of course, if you're online at 9 p.m. tomorrow night, you'll be able to vote. They can't actually exclude you from that. But I would certainly say, give yourself plenty of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of brings us into our next slide. We'll kind of walk you through here. It's a good thing for our democracy when there's a lot of participation. We've seen a record amount of people come out and already vote. If you take a look at the in-person votes and the combination of mail-in votes, we have 90 million people that have already cast the ballot as of yesterday. That's about 2/3 of everyone that had voted in 2016 for the entire election. To put it in perspective, I mean, when Mitt Romney was running against Barack Obama in 2012, he earned a total of 60 million votes total. So already we've had 90 million people cast their ballots. So this is a good thing. We want people to participate in the democracy. The more people that participate, the more representative our government's going to be of the people's wishes.
Yeah, I love it. I think that, to Seth's point, I'd love to see this continue in the future. If you look at, for example, Dutchess County, for example, we had 5 sites. I mean, one of them was the Board of Elections, so that's basically up and running anyway. They're always there, and accepting absentee ballots. So the other 4 sites, I mean, if it helps to have things open for 9 days earlier than we would normally see in the past, there's a lot of people that don't vote, whether they're in a state where it never goes their way and they decide it's just not worth it, or whether they just can't get there. Maybe they work a far distance, you work in the city, and by the time you get home and maybe you're taking the train, then you got to go and get a bite to eat and then get on the line. It's exhausting for people. So if you've got 2 weekends to basically jump in a line and put your ballot in along the way, especially in the future, if COVID is not going to be here, hopefully in the future, then you just have people that are going to be voting Because they can, because it's more convenient, and I think this is fantastic if you can get more people, in this country voting in the future, like Seth said, it's a great point.
Yeah, and to Dan's point, just real quick, I mean, it's not that long ago that we had a president like Ronald Reagan that ran 49 of 50 states. So, I mean, you do have cases where, your vote will matter. You just don't know when that election cycle is going to happen. And it's not like that was all that long ago. That was the 1984 election within our lifetimes that literally 49 of 50 states. I believe he's the only president in history to do that.
Yeah, I think in the past too, you've seen a tremendous amount, especially the last two elections, where they've said that the Electoral College has been won by the person who's won. But in both of those cases and many more, that, the person that's the president of the United States, for some reason, does not end up winning the popular vote. And that's always the frustration. But my argument for that is that, what I just said, you get people that live in a state that maybe it's Democrat, maybe it's Republican, and you're opposite of that, and your vote never really matters because you can't get your choice through. People just decide to stay home. And so maybe this time, maybe it will be, a good situation this year where whoever the president's going to be sometime after tomorrow, maybe either one of them will actually win the popular vote and the Electoral College vote because of the amount of turnout that we're seeing this year. We'll have to see, but I think we have a good chance this year.
So this is interesting. This is kind of a breakdown between Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Just preferences. You can see that Democrats by 50% prefer to vote in mail and absentee voting, or in person early, around 28%, versus in person on election day. Republicans tend to favor, I can't really see my red writing here over the red here, Republicans here, by a fair majority prefer to vote in person on election day. What I found interesting about this is independents being independents, they kind of split the bill. I mean, they tend to be the swing voters anyway, but you've seen a good turnout as far as their mail and absentee ballot, also in person early, around 30% matching up with the Democrats, but only around 40%. So it kind of splits the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. So that's why it's really so hard to tell, especially with polls, what's going to happen, because you do see this large block of independents that are going to be voting on election day that may not be representative in polls yet. So this is interesting. This takes a look at mail-in voting in the 2020 election. Obviously, due to COVID, there have been a number of issues and changes to how we vote this year. But we wanted to make sure that we pointed out these purple states here. What's unique about these states is they were any registered voter was actually mailed out a ballot. Any of the blue states, so New York, Pennsylvania, you had to request your ballot, whether it was absentee or whether it was just voting by mail. So I guess one key takeaway is, as much as these states out here on the West Coast were all mailed ballots, typically they tend to go blue, they tend to go Democrat. So we don't really see an issue with any of those states. Where we potentially could see an issue is with like the Nevadas, the Utahs, maybe Vermont, maybe New Jersey. But because everyone was mailed a ballot, it might actually take longer to get those ballots counted and accounted for.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add one thing. I mean, in New Jersey, my brother lives in New Jersey, and so in New Jersey, you do not have an option to go to a poll tomorrow and vote if you wanted to do that. They don't offer it because of COVID, and because everyone's already been mailed a voter application already without requesting one back. It's going to take a while for some of these purple states to count up all of these ballots because clearly they're pretty sizable states, especially California. I mean, it's a very large state. Yes, it's easier to count the ballots in New Jersey, Vermont, but on the same token, on those states where there's nobody actually in a booth pushing a lever, there's gonna be contestations, and there's gonna be legal teams from the Democrats and Republicans at each polling location as they go through painstakingly every single ballot to make sure that, was it signed? Is the signature matching up? There's a whole bunch of things that go into this. You would definitely expect, a lot of legal challenges, which will further delay the results of the election.
So this is kind of a busy slide, so we're just going to walk you through it point by point, but we found this very interesting. So we kind of have two categories of states here. On this side, we have states in which mail-in ballots must be received by or on November 3rd to be counted, okay? Now in this section, this is kind of amazing to me when we kind of break this down. Only these purple states, so Arizona, Hawaii, Colorado, Montana, Rhode Island, Delaware, they're actually allowed to count their ballots and process them as they get them, as they come in, or before Election Day. This one makes a little bit more sense, this green group with Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Missouri, Oregon, Oklahoma, etc. They can actually start processing these ballots at the start of business tomorrow morning before the polls actually close. To me, this actually makes sense. Hey, look, it's Election Day. We can open the ballots. We can start the process. And why are we having some other states wait until after polls close? But this kind of goes into, hey, each individual state has their own policies and their own politics. And this is why we have a separation between the federal government and the state government, because every state does it a little bit differently. Conversely, on the other side, the difference is any of these states, ballots can maybe received after November 3rd to be counted, and the deadlines vary by state. So it comes down to individual states. But really, the key thing here is, of the states, only New York and certain localities in Texas will actually count or have the ability to count ballots after Election Day. So I think that's important to note that although there's been a lot of talk of, could the mail-in balloting delay it? Yes, especially because of the volume of it. But starting tomorrow, 48 of the 50 states have the ability to be counting their actual votes. I think that what both Dan and I agree with is it's not necessarily going to be an issue as far as getting the ballots counted, as much as it could be an issue of certifying that the ballots are accurate.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Because of all these states, like New York as well, first time that we have actually allowed in-person early voting, right? So you're going to have plenty of states like that are going to have to make a decision on, how quickly can they get those ballots counted, and does it have to occur after the polls close or before? It's going to be you're going to have a situation where, unless one of the candidates is so far ahead or so confident about it that they kind of self-proclaim themselves as the winner of the election, I don't know if you're going to basically see that. And so, clearly, the more delay that happens there, the more frustration and behaviors that you're going to see that start out there potentially, that could obviously, cause some other problems. So, it's quite a feat looking at this chart, that's for sure. But, it's safe to say that you're not going to know who the president is that night.
We just want to talk about 9 states that are really potentially the swing states. And for President Trump, I mean, his key is up here in the Rust Belt. You have Wisconsin, Michigan. He's got a pretty good lead in Ohio right now. And Pennsylvania is really kind of a keystone for it. One thing that is kind of surprising is Georgia is considered a swing state this time around. Joe Biden has performed very well. The last time Georgia went for a Democrat was actually in 1992 with Bill Clinton. And he's also in contention in North Carolina. The point is there's a lot of different options that can be put together here, and we're talking some big electoral college states. I mean, Pennsylvania has 20, Florida has 29, North Carolina has 15. Any one of these going to the opposite party could potentially swing the overall electoral college. But we just want to make sure that really, I mean, we want to, as much as we're talking about, yes, we want our votes to count. These key states are what most of the experts are going to be watching and seeing how they start to swing, especially early on. I believe Pennsylvania's polls close, are they 7 or 7:30? They close early.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that you're going to have a good idea pretty early on with Pennsylvania how the night's going to go.
Yeah, and that's key. I mean, we don't know how this is going to work out, but we know that they've been crisscrossing across the country right now, going to Arizona, back to Pennsylvania, Iowa, Michigan. You know, they've all been there. They've all been there in every one of those states at least several times in the last week. And so, you know, who knows where it's going to land, but obviously that's where, you know, that's where it exists, I think, for both of them.
One thing I will point out that's not actually on this map, for those that don't know, Nebraska is actually separated into 4 districts, and you can actually separate out those electoral college votes. I've seen a number of different models that show even just the one, I believe it's the 2nd district in Nebraska, actually swinging the entire election. So one candidate having 269 and the other one having 270 electoral college votes. So you can imagine how contentious that might be if it was to come down to one electoral college vote.
I think Maine's the same way.
Yeah, Maine has different splits as well.
Yeah.
So those are things to watch as well, because there are certainly possibilities and people that are saying if it comes down to one vote, how contentious this might actually be.
Sure.
So this is just talking about, we want to touch base on the Senate race. I know we talked about it in our first video, but really what's different between this cycle and the 2018 cycle is the Republicans are defending more seats. So it kind of gives a slight advantage to the Democrats because they're not having to defend home turf as much. And this is exactly kind of what happened in the 2018 race when the Democrats took back the House. But conversely, if you look at what happened in 2016 with the Republicans taking control of both the Senate and the House. So you have a number of very solid and likely lean, but really it comes down to these toss-up states: Alabama, Arizona, Colorado, and Maine. Could we see a shift 1 or 2 seats towards the Democrats? Yeah. Could it be 50-50? Personally, I would prefer a 50-50 Senate. But really, if you're looking as far as the Senate race on election night, these are the 4 states to watch as far as a balance of power. All right, this is interesting. Will we have a repeat of 2000? This is the Orlando Sentinels. Same day. So these were all the headlines on the same day of election day in 2000, them declaring that it was Bush, or is it Bush, with a question mark, and then contested all on the same day. Do we possibly see something like this happening? Yeah, we've kind of been saying for a while that we don't think that by Wednesday we're going to know who the next president is. Are we going to have a Supreme Court case? We're not saying that, but it's not like we haven't been down this road before.
Yeah, and that's key. I mean, you know, as this is so close right now, you know, could you have a runaway victory by either one? You know, I guess I suppose you could, but I think it's very unlikely that you could. I think it's going to be very very close, and even without a lot of the states that have had the in-person early voting, that have sent all ballots to every single person this year. Even without all that, I think it still would have been very close anyway, and hopefully not contested, but basically it's going to be quite interesting to see how this unfolds. And of course the markets, I think, will react to that. Remember, the markets do not like uncertainty, and you're coming into a very uncertain situation starting tomorrow.
Speaking of that uncertainty, we've touched base on this slide a few times, but if we go back 4 years, this was election night. Everyone had priced in, all the experts, if you will, that Hillary Clinton was going to win by a landslide. And as the returns were coming in, or the polls were closing that night, you could see the stock market here was in a tailspin, as it looked like Trump was going to win, and the futures were actually down. They got down to around, I believe, 1,000 points that night.
Yeah.
So to what Dan was just saying, the markets just do not like uncertainty. What I think is different this time around is the market has priced in the possibility of either one winning. And there are plans moving forward. But we've talked about our plans in previous videos as far as what we would do with the Trump presidency, or continuing, or with the Biden presidency. The point is, there's not as much faith in these polls anymore, and people have adjusted to needing to have multiple outcomes and multiple plans going forward. So this is the night, obviously, of Election Day. We fast forward just 24 hours and you can see, hey, look, the market actually ended up 250 points the day after the election. Why? Because policy got priced in and the markets really could understand where they're going to be able to make sufficient or investments in the different areas that would work well under a Trump presidency. All right, there's been some updates since our first video as far as the economy. The one key thing is, and we were kind of bringing back this chart, and I know Dan will speak about this a little bit, but we got our GDP numbers, and they came back at a record level. But that has to be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah, that's it. You know, I love this chart. I've always loved it, like Seth said, and you know, I always kind of try and explain to people that the more you lose, the harder it is to make it back up again. So, for example, you know, a 10% drop is not just a 10% drop. You've got to make back 11.1% to get back to break even. You know, if you lose 25%, then basically, you know, you didn't lose just 25. You've got to make 33.3% to get back to break even. I always use this example that if I gave you $1 and you gave me 75 cents back, for me to get back to that dollar, I've got to make 25, but I only have the 75 cents left over. 25 over 75 is 33. So if you lose 50%, it's 100% to get back to break even. So when we look at, you know, where it was in our economy on the next slide, you can see that basically, and I'll just skip the one for a second. You can see that the second quarter of this year, you saw GDP drop by 34% overall. So when you look at 34% drop in the gross domestic product for just the third quarter, I'm sorry, for the second quarter, of course, you know, that makes sense, right? The economy was really shut down from March through June. So it makes sense we would see that kind of drop off. But realistically, you didn't lose just 34%. Now you need to make 51% to get back to break even, another 17% on top of the 34 you've already lost, just to get back to break even, okay? And so the key thing is that we keep that in mind because, you know, in this past week, you just had GDP numbers that were very good. I think that it was a 33% increase, 33.1% increase of GDP for the third quarter of 2020. Now it's fantastic. It's a great number, unbelievable. And certainly they were forecasting a high number already. But remember, we're still in the negative for the year, you know? We had that first quarter already in 2020 where the economy was down about 5-6% in that first quarter. And that's because March, January, February were very good. But March obviously was the beginning of the pandemic, the shutdown. And so, you know, that was still in the first quarter. Of course, the second quarter was horrific. And now the third quarter with most of the US economy starting to reopen again, getting back into, we're not going to say full swing, but certainly some kind of swing. But we don't want you to think also that we're out of the woods. I mean, a 33% increase for one quarter is fantastic, but we've got more to go, knowing that we've got to get back 51% just to get back to break even. So we've still got a hole to climb out of, but we're getting closer to the top. We can maybe see some daylight, but there's certainly some things to still be concerned about.
Yeah, and to kind of jump off what Dan was saying, just to kind of rephrase it, just because, since we lost 34, but we made back 33, doesn't mean we only got 1% to go. I mean, it's nowhere close to that as we kind of go into this next slide. We actually have to we've made back about 2/3 of our overall GDP. So you can see right here, but you can see how devastating that second quarter was. I mean, this GDP number would brought us back to around 2012 levels if we had maintained that. But the other key thing to see with this is historically such a quick turnaround of economic events. and and cycles that, yeah, we're already back to like 2018 levels as far as growth is concerned. But this rebound already, even with things not fully open, does give us some optimism going forward, although we are definitely not out of the woods yet.
Yeah.
So this is key for us. We had on that one chart a few slides ago. Let me take us back here. We always talk about consumer spending and how much of a portion of our economy it is. So this gray area here is consumer spending, and that's really where we saw the biggest decline in the second quarter. What's interesting for us going forward is where have we lost that consumer spending and where have we gained it, quite frankly. This doesn't surprise us at all. So our net zero here is our consumer spending number. You can see this huge spike, obviously, initially on groceries. No one's going out to eat, and it still is remaining positive or elevated. This is our overall spending, the black line here. But really, the biggest detriment to our consumer spending, and it's no surprise to anyone, is recreation and entertainment. I mean, we're not going to movie theaters, we're not going to sporting events, we're not going to concerts, we're not going out to the bar, we're not doing any of that. We also saw a huge decline in transportation and hotels and restaurants. No one's going anywhere. No one's traveling for leisure. So of course, these numbers are going to remain low. But going forward, these numbers, these are the ones that are going to end up picking us up and out of this thing. You can see that it's slightly come back since April and May as we've opened up a little bit. But we've said for a while now, until we see that consumer spending number really get back to break even, which it's slowly getting there, we're a little bit down, maybe 7 or 8%, which makes sense compared to our GDP numbers. But until we get that back to a normal spending level, we don't feel as though that we're totally out of the woods yet.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And some of this, a lot of it will be dictated on what, the individual governors do in the United States as maybe more COVID cases resurge. I mean, Seth and I were talking this morning, and last week, Paris, France decided that they were going to shut down, and they gave everybody until November 1st at midnight to either get in Paris or get out of Paris before they lock it down. There was a 430-mile backup of cars waiting to get into and out of Paris, France. 430-mile car backup. I mean, it's incredible to think of it, but that's what happens. And clearly over the weekend, London as well, is going to have a lockdown now through December 1st. So they're hoping to. It's a decision they're making, and you're going to have some governors that decide to make different decisions based on what they experience as well, kind of going forward. So we're certainly not out of the woods yet as far as the the GDP number. If we start to have a serious increase of hospitalizations, deaths, then some of the states will maybe go back into a lockdown, therefore shutting the economy back down again. So, in these areas like entertainment, recreation, transport, hotels and restaurants, we're not done with it yet. Let's see what happens throughout the winter.
All right, we're just going to do a quick recap. So these will be some familiar slides if you've stayed through with us for these past 3 videos. What's up for at stake in the Senate? 35 seats, 23 Republicans and 12 Democrats. As you might recall, Senate seats are up at your terms are 6 years. Conversely, with the House of Representatives, 435, and your seats are up for grabs every 2 years. So that's why we tend to see more shifting in the House of Representatives. Historically, the market really doesn't care who wins, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. You can see we had great increases under both a Republican with Reagan or under Clinton. Saw historic before the .com bubble burst right here. Obama and Trump have continued that. They both had fantastic bull markets. So really the market, as long as they have policy in place and it's solidified, they're able to price in appropriately and really take advantage of the marketplace. All right, so one touch base on the second video. They pretty much touched on what we were planning on doing with regards to portfolios, and our plan here is when we finally have some policy clarity, we're going to touch or start to reduce our gold position. Regardless who wins, we're going to invest in technology, healthcare, and dividend growers. We're going to really start to reduce that cash position once we start to have some stability past the election. We're going to rebalance everything by the end of the year. This has certainly been a volatile year. You've seen wild swings in both directions, and it's key for us to have the allocations in their proper places going forward into 2021 and to take advantage of stability of 2021. I don't think I'm going out on a limb, hoping that it'll be slightly less stressful or unstable as 2020. So hopefully going forward, we'll be able to maybe sit back, have a breather, relax, and have some clarity as far as things, regardless of whether it's politics or whether it's, the status of the pandemic. All right, where do we go from here? Well, tomorrow's election day, so go out and vote. I know I'm going to plan on trying to get it done before we come into the office tomorrow. Conveniently, there's a polling place at a church within walking distance of my house. Trust in the plan that we put in place. We're certainly throwing a curveball this year, but I can say since we started working on the portfolios and the plans in 2019, we had a plan in place and we were ready to put it into action in March, which we did. And throughout the rest of this year, we've stuck to that plan. Have we made minor adjustments along the way? Absolutely. But if you're not able to be flexible within a plan, what's the point of having a plan at all? Regardless of a Trump or Biden victory, we're definitely ready. And make sure that you call us if you have concerns or questions. We're here. It's amazing the variety of different questions that we get on a daily basis. So don't hesitate to pick up the phone and give us a ring.
Yeah, that's key. When we kind of look at Trump victory or Biden victory, like Seth said, the markets basically have priced in scenarios for either one. In the past, people have said that, maybe with a Biden victory, the markets would get crushed. We're not seeing that. We're seeing that basically the market likes certain parts of the industries that would do well under a Biden term of office as well. But certainly, no matter who is in, whether Trump stays or Biden becomes the next president, we're ready for this. We know certain areas that we want to be into, but we're going to take our time. We're going to make sure that we know exactly what's going on. And then beyond that, then it becomes a question of more volatility due to events surrounding COVID. That will really be the main kicker in the end. If COVID resurges and we can't get a handle on it, and they start having more widespread shutdowns in the United States, well, then that's going to dictate, no matter who's president, what happens in the economy. So, all we can say is just get ready for it. It's going to be a volatile week. I know that we have cities under unrest, that they are actually boarding up buildings in many cities across the country. So if you live in those areas, if you have family members in those areas, please be careful. No matter who wins or loses, just try and be very discreet. Whether you're on the winning side of it, you're on the losing side of it. I would say that you want to really just try and keep that stuff to yourself, especially if you're in those cities that are going to have perhaps a lot of violence and outrage, perhaps looting, vandalism. You want to really try and make sure that you stay away from those things. But I would say, listen, expect it. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And in this case, if it's in that situation where you have a lot of people that are going through that kind of event right now, and if there's volatility, just be careful. Just keep your wits about you. Stay safe. Make sure you and your family, your kids, your grandkids are staying out of harm's way.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add to that. It's certainly been, go figure, on top of everything that happened in 2020, we're going to have a very volatile election, but it's not like our country hasn't seen turmoil before. When it comes down to it, we're all Americans. I think the bigger the turnout, the better. I think that we're fortunate to live where we live, and you should take advantage of the rights that are given to you and go out and cast that ballot regardless of who you're voting for. I know I feel like whatever my political beliefs, I feel as though I can have a conversation with anyone and be respectful of it. And I think that people tend to forget that they can be respectful of other people's views nowadays. So we'd encourage you to go out and vote. We have this plan in place. I always touch base on the plan at the end of videos. So whether you have a question about our plan or your plan, make sure you give us a ring. But have a good rest of your day, and remember to go out and vote tomorrow.
Sounds good. We'll see you on the other side.